On the very early morning of July 13th, 2020, a very and completely burned body was found by a group of people in a wooded area in the state of Michigan. The body was identified as Susie Zhao, a 33-year-old Chinese immigrant who had moved to the United States when she was still young. Susie was a rising poker star. She had already won more than $200,000 in tournaments, and this made the police theorize that she had been the victim of a crime due to a debt. But the truth is that Susie was actually indeed a victim for a much worse reason. Hey everyone, how are you all doing today? Welcome back to my channel. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about a truly terrible case that happened in 2020 in the state of Michigan in the United States. Susie Zhao was born on June 9, 1987 in Beijing, the capital of China. When she was just 8 years old, she immigrated to the United States along with her mother. In the United States, the family settled in the state of Michigan. From a young age, Susie loved games. In high school, she learned a card game, something that changed the course of her life. That game was poker. She got better and better as she played. Susie and her friends used to play in the basement of their apartment complex. They spent hours playing and betting on small things, such as cards and sometimes lunch money. Susie took poker very seriously. She was intelligent and had a real aptitude for games. She was also very good at mathematics, something very necessary for anyone who plays poker, in addition to having a keen intuition and ability to bluff and deceive her opponents. As time went by, Susie became increasingly known for her talent at poker, and this earned her the nickname by which she became known, Poker Face. It seemed like Susie was living the true American dream. However, behind this brilliant woman and excellent poker player, there was something that she tried to hide from most people. Few knew, but Susie had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, something that was gradually and significantly affecting her life. In 2010, after graduating from Northwestern University with a degree in psychology, she went to Los Angeles to pursue her dream of becoming a professional poker player. Up until that very moment, Susie had really only participated in local tournaments, many of which were organized by students at the college where she studied. For the next 10 years, Susie spent her life playing cash games at local casinos and frequently traveled to Las Vegas to participate in tournaments. For those who don't know, cash game is the format in which each chip has a monetary value according to its color. In other words, depending on the color of the chip, it is worth the equivalent of the real value of the money. In poker, players can enter with the amount they want and leave with the amount of chips they want according to their winnings. By that time, Susie had already won more than $200,000 from poker. It wasn't enough for her to live a luxurious life, but it was enough to pay the bills. It seemed that more and more she was conquering her space in poker. Everything indicated that soon she would truly become a poker professional, being able to achieve fame and earn a lot of money over time. Despite being surrounded by friends, Susie never expressed how she really felt to them. She didn't let anyone know what was going on in her mind. Few knew about their inner feelings and fears. Although her friends noticed that she was becoming increasingly quiet and withdrawn in recent years, they were completely unaware of her challenges with her mental condition. For some unknown reason, Susie did not want her friends to know what she was going through. Maybe she did not want to worry them, or did not want to be seen as someone with some kind of weakness. Susie's parents knew about her condition and how vulnerable she was because of it. They saw Susie suffer and felt helpless because they couldn't do anything about it, except, of course, provide family support. In a later statement, Susie's mother said that her daughter had been diagnosed with schizophrenia years ago. They tried their best, did everything they could to ensure Susie had a productive and healthy life. However, unfortunately, Susie did not want to accept her condition, and this hindered the treatment. In 2015, Susie's mother, together with her stepfather, had to make a drastic decision and tried to forcibly admit her daughter through a court order. As I already said, Susie did not accept her condition, and this hindered the treatment, something that would have consequences for her life. Susie was hospitalized, however, she managed to escape hospitalization. In 2018, a new attempt at hospitalization was made. Susie was already an adult and again did not want to receive treatment. In the year 2020, Susie appeared to be experiencing active symptoms of psychosis. Even so, she remained in denial and did not accept that she had schizophrenia. A longtime friend of Susie's named Michelle LeGroux said Susie called her out of the blue a few days before the crime. The two were friends when they were teenagers, but they had lost touch and hadn't spoken to each other for several years. Michelle was surprised, and after a conversation with Susie, the two arranged to spend the second weekend in July together. Michelle arranged to take her 3-year-old daughter so Susie could meet her. According to Michelle, the Susie she found was completely different from the Susie she knew and lived with years ago, and that scared her a little. Michelle said things were already awkward before they even met. According to Michelle, Susie changed her meeting location 3 times, and her behavior on the phone seemed strange. On July 11th, Susie asked to borrow Michelle's car. Michelle found it very strange indeed, and fearing that something bad might happen on that particular day, she made an excuse and did not lend the car. Nevertheless, Susie secretly took the car keys and left with the vehicle without Michelle seeing. Michelle said that Susie kept her vehicle for several hours and, during that time, did not give any updates. The next day in the morning, Susie returned with the car, and then, instead of giving it back to Michelle, she stayed inside the vehicle. At one point, Susie started repeatedly and continuously raising and lowering the car window up and down. She did the same with the music, turning the radio on and off repeatedly. Then, she acted as if someone was choking her, gasping for air. Susie was having one of her crises. She was completely out of control, something common in people with schizophrenia who do not receive adequate treatment. As Michelle was unaware of her friend's condition, she thought Susie was under the influence of some kind of drug. Very concerned about the safety of her 3-year-old daughter, Michelle asked Susie to get out of the car and then took her to a gas station. In the meantime, Michelle called Susie's mother to explain what had happened and gave her the location of the gas station so the woman could pick up her daughter. Susie's mother knew what was happening to her daughter. The woman then picked her up and took her home. A short time later, Susie's stepfather and mother went out to dinner. They returned home around 10:15 p.m. and realized that Susie was no longer there. This was on a Sunday, July 12, 2020. That was the last day Susie was seen alive by her mother. Little is known about what really happened, but it is certain that at some point in her life, Susie met Jeffrey Bernard Morris. Susie probably didn't know, but Jeffrey had a long criminal record whose first crimes date back to the 80s. Among the man's crimes were harassment of women, robbery, assault, domestic violence, driving under the influence of alcohol, and possession of drugs. Furthermore, he was on parole after being arrested for robbing a store. Somehow on this Sunday, July 12th, Jeffrey convinced Susie to meet with him. This is something difficult to imagine. Jeffrey was over 60 and Susie was 33. Why would she meet him? Some people speculated that Jeffrey was a drug dealer and Susie was a user, and that was the reason for their meeting. However, this was not confirmed after an investigation by the authorities. A woman who had rented the basement of her home to Jeffrey described him as creepy. Jeffrey lived in that basement for about 4 months until the owner decided to ask him to leave. The reason for this, according to this woman, was because she felt completely uncomfortable with Jeffrey around. She said something about him, besides his appearance, scared her. Phone records showed 8 calls between Susie and Jeffrey before they met. The two checked into the Sherwood Motel at 9:26 p.m. on July 12th. This was shortly after Susie left her mother's house, which is a few kilometers from this motel. The motel is located in the city of Waterford Township and is close to a Mexican restaurant and several stores selling all types of items. Most people who pass by are travelers looking for a cheap place to rest. This motel was Susie's favorite when she went to town to visit her mother. This was before she had to move back in with her mother due to the 2019 global health crisis. The crisis, as everyone knows, affected several sectors of the industry, and as a result, The casinos in which Susie worked to earn her money were closed. Security camera footage later revealed that Jeffrey had stolen cable ties and Vaseline from a nearby store just minutes before the store closed. These items were later found at the crime scene. Sometime after entering the motel room together, Jeffrey attacked Susie, leaving her unconscious. Then he placed her on the bed and used the clamps he had stolen from the store to secure her to the furniture. Jeffrey forced himself on Susie so violently that her private parts suffered severe damage. When he was done doing whatever he wanted with Susie, Jeffrey got her out of bed and into his vehicle. Susie was alive but still unconscious. Jeffrey drove for a few kilometers until he reached a wooded area where he stopped his car and got out. He then took Susie out of the vehicle, dragged her into the woods, and then poured gasoline on her body and set her body on fire. Remembering Susie was still alive when he did all this. According to medical examiners who later examined the victim's body, there was soot in her lungs, indicating that she was still breathing as she was consumed by the fire. Susie suffered second and third degree burns to almost 95% of her body. She was completely unrecognizable. His body was found the following morning by a group of people who were passing along a trail that leads to a recreation area at Pontiac Lake, approximately 10 kilometers from the motel. This group of people told the police that at first they didn't believe what they saw and that they thought it was some kind of prank. However, when they got closer to the body and took a closer look, they realized that it was indeed a real body and quickly informed the authorities. The medical examiners estimated that Susie's body was left at the scene at approximately 5 a.m. Since Susie was completely unrecognizable, her identification was only possible through her fingerprints. After the identification, the detectives theorized that the motive for the crime could be due to a gambling debt. That's because Susie was a rising poker star, as I already mentioned. However, all that cruelty would lead the investigation in another direction, a direction that led the detectives to Jeffrey Morris. Jeffrey was arrested 10 days after the crime. He was driving west on I-275, about 30 miles from where Susie's body was found. He was found thanks to the victim's cell phone, which was with him and could be tracked to his location. During the investigation, officers had access to the security cameras of the motel where Susie and Jeffrey met. In them, you can see the two walking down a corridor, heading towards the room they rented. After his arrest, Jeffrey claimed to the police that Susie stayed at the motel until midnight and that after that he took his things and left. He said he had done nothing to the victim and that when he left the motel she was alive and well. Obviously, the police did not believe Jeffrey, as everything indicated that he was responsible for the crime. For authorities, Jeffrey took advantage of Susie's mental vulnerability and manipulated her in some way so that she would meet him. He had planned everything, and the cameras that caught him stealing the armbands and Vaseline proved it. The crime was not something impulsive, it was something thought out, premeditated, something that Jeffrey certainly waited a long time to put into practice. In an examination carried out on Jeffrey's cell phone and computer, the police found more than 2,000 internet searches for adult content of a violent nature. The content he consumed most were videos showing Asian women being subjected to all types of violence. According to authorities, Jeffrey had an unhealthy fascination with Asian women, which was one of the reasons he chose Susie as his victim. Jeffrey Bernard Morris went to trial on November 10, 2022. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding him guilty on all charges. Ultimately, Jeffrey was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was 62 years old at the time and is likely to spend the rest of his days in prison. It is very sad that Susie hid her mental condition from her friends and also did not accept help. Maybe things could have been different and she could have been alive. People like her are in a highly vulnerable situation, and when they cross paths with people like Jeffrey, tragedies happen.
Well, guys, that's it. Thank you very much for watching me until the end. I'll stop here. A big hug and see you next time.